Hello, this is Scott Conway, or Grandmaster Scott with one T, however you know me. And one of the things I want to talk about right now is this idea of what's your solution and how well are your posts aging. So let me pull up my share screen here. Um, so, what's your solution? I posted a few of these because I get asked this question. It's a fair question, I think. I'm going to talk about the coronavirus response. I think it's fair for some. Well, what would you have done? Because it's easy to unleash platitudes about who did well and who did poorly and who said what and what ought to have been done. But part of the question is, so what would you have actually done? How would you have done it? What do you think would have been the unintended consequences of all of that? And very often, the version of this we see is someone has their opinion, has their conclusion, and they're telling everyone else what they should do and passing judgment on everyone who disagrees with them because they're so sure that they're right. Well, one of the questions that comes up often is, what if you end up not being right? In fact, what happens if not only do you end up not being right, but the evidence comes out that you were wrong and that it existed at the time you passed your judgment? And so that comes down to a question of how well do your posts age? Now, what gets me curious sometimes is, I'm sharing things from 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 8 years ago that are still applicable today, that aren't even just platitudes, they're concrete ideas. And so some of this of what's your solution? How would you solve the problem? How do you define the problem? How do you understand the problem? And you can go back through some of my posts and go all the way back into May, go all the way back into March and April, if you like, talking about the coronavirus, looking early on in the protests and early on in the riots and dealing with the issues. And I am comfortable that when all of this settles down and we're looking back on it, that my posts will have aged well. And if someone's going to use my approach on some of these hot button issues to determine my thinking, and in particular, and here's a big one, to see how do you handle someone who disagrees with you? How do you come to a problem? Because if you're going to hire me and you're paying me money to help you solve a problem, how do I come to problems? Am I reactionary or am I thoughtful? Do I look for what my fact gaps are and what do we need to know? What are our objectives? How do the solutions relate to the objectives? And my income depends on your faith in how I look at problems and how I develop solutions. If my income, my ability to provide, my ability to put food on the table and a roof over my head is going to depend upon someone's faith in my problem solving ability, how do I do? And now stuff like this starts to get more important when we begin to see other things. When you see how I handle people who disagree with me, and and Lord knows there's been some of those. How do I handle that? Because you can have some faith that if you and I get to know each other, if you and I work together, if you pay me or I'm paying you, that somewhere down this path, you and I are going to disagree on something. And how do we handle the disagreement? When we need to talk, when we engage, how do we engage? How do I engage? What questions do I ask? How do I process an issue? Do I leap to conclusions? Do I leap to global conclusions? Because if we are going to work together and we are going to disagree, do you want to have some faith that the way I will handle it, should we ever disagree, is going to be something that you can trust? So when we reflect back on how we're jumping in on any of these issues, to just know we will have people we disagree with. But for myself, if someone agrees with me 80% of the time, I consider that unanimous. Because we're going to disagree on things sometimes. And I want to know we can have a conversation about where we disagree. And as we begin to unpack that, and as we begin to look at it, and we begin to understand what we mean, I want to know that if I'm going to engage with you and I'm going to ask you questions of, well, how do you mean that? How do you know that? If that's true or if that's not true, does that matter to you? Is this a actual relevant argument, or is this just an argument for the sake of an argument? Are we defining a problem that we can solve, or are we not defining a problem we can solve? Are we trying to make something better, or are we just picking a fight? And all of these things are relevant to me for me to be doing business with you. So I'm assuming some of these would be relevant to you to do business with me. Now, some of this might be particularly important to me because I teach the Ohana way. I teach a system called the Ohana Conversations, and I charge a couple of $1,000s for the totality of the program. And so if I'm going to be teaching it and you were to jump on my page and you're going to see how I engage and go, whoa, whoa, if he's teaching what he's doing, I'm not interested because he's not doing it. But if you go onto my page and you look at my post, okay, he really does what he says he teaches. And so if I learn how to do this and all the pieces in the background that's involved in this, and what I can learn to do and how I can learn to think matches up with what I'm actually seeing, that will help me have conversations, the hard conversations, the important conversations. So for all of us, how are our posts aging? How comfortable are we just leaving our opinions out there and being looked at by people who might want to do business with us in the future, by people we may want to do business with in the future? Not as where we stand on this particular issue, whichever this is your issue, but on how we approach issues, on how we approach problems, on how we approach disagreement, on how we deal with people when we have problems to solve and when we have disagreements over the problems and the solutions. Because you and I will disagree. And if you're with either of the major parties, we're going to disagree. Because I'm a libertarian. Guess what? I don't agree with the Republicans. I don't agree with the Democrats. And I do agree with the Republicans. And I do agree with the Democrats. It seems it's a mixed bag because I'm in a party that kind of has its own consistent principles and philosophy, matches about half-half. So I need to know how to do this on political issues because it's really relevant to me personally and individually because I am not a member of either of the major parties. And so it'd be really foolish for me to say, well, I'm right and everybody else is wrong and they're just stupid and idiots and call them names and pass judgment and say they're evil and call everybody Nazis, because I could make a case, I suppose, but is that going to help me actually solve anything? And so you decide how you want to come to things and consider how well your posts age and consider what it is telling people about you. And so that when you come back and you take a look at some of my things and you see what I wrote last week, last month, if you could go back down through the years and you see when I seem to be posting some fairly lengthy things, I dive into some stuff. I'm not just posting cute little memes and lofty sounding platitudes. I'm talking about stuff. And that when you go take a look and you see what I'm talking about and you see what I'm doing, and you come back to it a month later, a year later, when new evidence has come out, when we have a better understanding, and you're going to look back and see, what did I say and how much did what I say depended on things working out a certain way and not working out another way? Can you take a look at my posts from last week, last month, last year, and will I be happy having those still represent me today for how it is you can expect me to work with you when we disagree? This is Scott Conway, Grandmaster Scott with 1T, and I really hope these are helping. I hope these are thought-provoking. I'll see you later.